All right. Hi, guys. As we move into talking about web programming for the rest of the semester, I wanted to talk with you a little bit about working with files and folders and GitHub, and especially in this context of working with web pages. And we're going to kind of build on what we've been working on. We've learned how to make repositories in GitHub, and we've forked repositories for assignments and turned in our links to our repositories for our assignments. And we're going to continue to do that, but we're going to add a little something extra by turning on something called GitHub Pages, where you can actually put files for a website onto GitHub and have GitHub deliver that content as if it were a real website. And in essence, this is a real website. They call this a static website, where you're not really using a server to generate any dynamic content. And so this is going to be great. We're going to use this pretty much for the rest of this semester in our assignments. We're still going to turn in a link to our repository, but we're also going to turn in a link to our GitHub Pages site. So we've kind of learned, and let's just kind of review a little some things about working with repositories. So I'm here in my GitHub account, all my repositories, and I can see a list of the repositories, and I'm just going to make a new one. And I'm going to call this files test, and I'm going to go ahead and add a README file in here and create this. So before we even get into making web pages, this is a really nice way that you can share some content with anybody. This is a public repository, and is just editing this README file, and you can do this right in GitHub. And so you'll see that this is what they call markdown, and it's kind of just a shortened way to format some text using some of these shortcuts. This pound sign or number sign is a top level heading. So I'm going to call that level 1. You can have some text in there, and if you want to do another level of heading, you can call that level 2. And you can keep on going. And when you commit those changes, you can see that you have these different levels here. So it really is very easy to go make, if you want to throw some information up online and share it. That's probably the quickest and easiest way you can do things. Really easy to just paste a hyperlink in there and somebody can link to it. So this is probably one of the easiest things that we have. If we go back to the main page for the branch, you can see, or for the repository, you can see, I've got my README file, and GitHub is set up to display this README.md file automatically when you go to the repository. So it's a great place to put something. So we have added files into here, and we've done this with creating new files, and you can put in a new file, and I'm just going to put this as a text file and put in a little bit of text and commit that. And you can see that GitHub is set up to display the README file, but I can go look at this text file, and I can even go edit it there if I want to. Something else that's pretty handy is you can actually create some folders here. So if you want to make a folder you're going to do that the same as creating a new file, and you're going to put in the name of your folder and then add a slash, and you'll notice here that that got moved out of the file name and kind of added to the directory. And you'll notice that we can't just add a folder without putting something in it. There's no way I can commit this. So it's really easy to make a dummy text file and commit new file. If I go back to my main repository page, you'll see now that I have my main markdown page, and I've got our test text file that we put in there, and now I've got a folder. And if I go look in that folder, you'll see I've got my other text file, happens to be empty. So it's really easy to set some folders up in here. If I want to go into here, if I'm in that folder, you'll notice that I can actually create a new file, and if I you'll see it automatically has that there, and I can commit that. If I go to my main page, then we've got something easy to do. So I think the next thing I'm going to show you guys is, we've worked a lot with text files here, and I'm going to go ahead and just add in something that's pretty easy to do. And let me get some dummy HTML. And okay, so if I add another file to this, but I want to make it a web page, and so I'm going to create a new file, and usually your base page in a website is called index, and I'm just going to copy some basic text for a web page. Now you can edit these files here on GitHub directly, but this is no IDE. I would do all your development in a tool like VSCode that gives you a little bit of support. This actually is the HTML boilerplate from VSCode using Emmet. If you just type an exclamation point, you're going to have an option to create this boilerplate for an HTML page. And I'm just going to put a little HTML in there, a level 1 heading that says hello, and close it off, and I'm going to save that. So again, GitHub is set up to display the readme.markdown file, and we're still seeing that, but we have our test text file, and now I've got this index.html file. So the thing I wanted to show you guys is how to turn on what's called GitHub Pages, so that this can actually be displayed directly as a web page. And if I just click on this link and go to this file, it's going to treat it like any other file I have in my repository. And in this case, GitHub knows this is a type of text file. It's displaying the code to me, and I can go edit it. But if I was interested in seeing what this looked like as a rendered HTML page, GitHub will actually let me display that. So in my repository, I'm going to go to the Settings tab, And this is going to be current as of the date that I'm recording this, which is October 10th today of 2021. Something that is new is they've actually given the Pages section their own tab here in the settings menu, and so I'm going to click on the Pages section. If you're looking at older tutorials, a lot of these settings were kind of on one page, and you would just have to scroll down until you got to it. And this change is fairly recent, because you'll notice they still have their GitHub Pages heading, and they're telling you that it is now moved to its own tab. So we're going to go ahead, you click on that link, but we're going to click on the link to see the GitHub Pages section. And we're going to use this for our assignments and pretty much not have to change any settings. We're going to use all the defaults. So you'll see that it's asking, telling you that GitHub Pages is currently disabled, and we're going to select the source to turn on GitHub Pages for this repository. So I'm not going to go into much detail, but you can actually make a subfolder and put your HTML pages in that subfolder, and you can have your this can be used as a repository for version control and a software project, and then you can have some separate HTML to talk about the project if you need something more complicated than just your default markdown README page. So we're not gonna worry about doing that. We're just gonna go to None and select the main branch, and then we're gonna hit Save. And you'll see that it tells us that our site is ready to be published, and this is going to be the address, and this is my GitHub account, so it's got my username, and then it's going to add a slash, and you'll see that that name, that directory name, is going to match the name of our repository. Now this does take a few minutes to show up. If I click on this directly, then and this was fast. So in that time that I did this, you'll see here is my HTML rendered as an HTML as a web page. Sometimes it can take up to 15 minutes for things to cycle through and for this link to actually work into something. So there it is. This provides us the link to this website which we have just created, and there is my hello with a level 1 heading. I can actually go back to my repository if I go to that index.html page and edit it. We can put in paragraph tag and commit that change. And if we go back to our document, again, this can take a couple minutes, so you'll see that this change did not show up, but if you give it a few minutes, then your changes will show up in your and there it is. You know, that's a couple minutes, and it just shows up. That was probably less than a couple minutes. So this is a great way to try something out if you're wanting to practice a little HTML. And this works great. You can put a CSS file in here. You can put a JavaScript file in there, and we're going to learn about creating that. But if you have a few pages on a website, it quickly gets to be a lot of files. And so one of the challenges of learning to create some web content is trying to find an organization structure in here. So I'm actually going to pretty much for most of the examples that I create for this class, I'm going to use kind of a simple folder structure. And I'm going to put, I'm going to leave my index.html page and any HTML kind of on this first level, but I am going to usually create, if we create a new file, I'm going to create a JavaScript folder, and script files have the extension .js, and so I'm going to just create this so that you can see the folders that I'm usually going to use. So now we have a JS folder, and if I make JavaScript, I'm going to put it in that folder. Usually for CSS, I'll just make a CSS folder, and you'll see how we use these in practice. And I'm going to commit that file, and if we go back, now you'll see we have a JavaScript folder and a CSS folder, and a lot of times maybe we will have an image or two. So I'm just going to make my dummy text folder in there and commit new file. And so now you can see I have something for JavaScript, something for CSS, and something for images. And if I don't really care about keeping this other folder, I can definitely go into these files and delete them. And we'll go to that file and delete that one. And you'll see when there's no more files in that folder that it has disappeared, and we can get rid of this other test file that I made. So here is a real basic web setup, and you've seen how to create some folders in GitHub, and you'll see that the minimum we need to display a page on the web is an index.html page. And this, of course, is pretty easy to do. And we can just create it all here on GitHub. But of course, it's easiest to work with this thing if we work in VSCode on our computer. So there's a couple options. We can clone this repository, in which case we'll go to code and we'll copy the address. And if we go into VSCode and to our command palette and select git clone, we're going to paste the address to our repository and hit enter, and we will need to go select where to keep that, and I'm just going to select repository location and open it. Okay, and you'll see here is the work that we did on GitHub already, and it is saved in there. I do have an example of our first assignment page that we created, and so I'm going to go ahead and update this with an example of some files that I already made. So I'm going to copy this text that I already made and paste it into this index.html page. And when you get into it, you'll recognize that this has some of the text from our first assignment. And I am going to, I added this link line right here, and this is very simple to do in VS Code. If you type in link, you'll see there's link and CSS, and it pretty much creates that for you. This is going to be a style sheet, and I've already said that I'm going to keep my CSS in a CSS folder, and you can see that I just have the CSS listed and then style.css, so I don't need that folder, that line, because I already have it there. So I'm going to go into my CSS, and you'll see that I have this style.css, and I'm actually going to delete that file, and I'm going to go ahead and just drag a couple files that I already created. So I have this style.css, and I actually wrote this using something called Sass, which makes making CSS pages a little bit easier. But Sass, you can write some code in there, and then it will create your CSS page for you. So there's our page called style.css. I have another image file that I'm going to move over there, and I can just drag that over to there, and I have a JavaScript file, which I will I don't think I even created anything in there. There is an empty one called that, so I'll just leave that how it is. So here I've made some changes into this repository on my computer, and it's really easy to go into GitHub and tell it that you've made some changes, and I've just added some files. So I'm going to use that commit message, and I'm going to go back to pull push in VS Code and say sync, and it tells me it's going to pull any new information from the repository and push any changes up. And hopefully when I go back to my repository and refresh the page, I still should have all the same files there, but if we look at index.html, it's going to have all those changes. So hopefully once GitHub catches up and sees the changes that I made, I can see that it's not seeing this that image file, and I might have to look at that a little more closely, how the image files get referenced in there. But and for some reason my image file did not make it up there, so probably not a big deal. What I'm going to do is let's try uploading a file and see what happens when I just manually add that in there. All right, so I can see that the file made it into there. Took a minute. So looks like that image file did not move up with my other repository changes, so I manually added it. But you can see that you know, we can we can make changes and move it there. And now I have a link to the web version of this repository, these web files I can turn in, and I have the main link to my GitHub repository. So this is what we're going to use for a lot of these web assignments so that we can upload our code and we can see what it looks like when it's rendered as HTML. So I hope that helps you understand a little bit of where we're going to be going with some of our web assignments. And hopefully, I think a lot of working with web pages is just getting practice doing it. And so this will be, I think, a good learning exercises for us to learn how to write some of these web pages and code them, and also how to get them to display online using GitHub Pages. So I thought this was a pretty neat tool which we could access and practice with a little bit this semester. So I hope things are going well, and I hope you have a good day, and I will talk to you later.